everyone. So today, my name is Gillian Griffin, and today I'm going to be presenting on my case note, which is on the case MB Almi Son, Valero v. MB Almi Son. And that case pertains to a bunker supplier slash subcontractor who sought to assert a lien against a vessel after its general contractor became insolvent. So the relevant statute in this case is the Commercial Instruments and Maritime Liens Act. And what this act states is that a supplier of necessaries can assert a lien against the vessel provided that it acted on the authority of either the vessel owner or an entity authorized by the vessel owner. And both the 5th and the 11th circuits agree that a general contractor is not presumed to have this authority, and that effectively prohibits a subcontractor from asserting a lien against a vessel. However, both of these circuits also agree that also have created an exception for subcontractors. So the 11th Circuit first considered this issue in Stevens Technical and Marine Coatings. In both of those cases, the 11th Circuit held that the subcontractor could assert a lien, and they looked at really similar factors for both. The first factor that they looked at was that the owner or authorized entity worked in close collaboration with the subcontractor or inspected its repairs, that the subcontractor was included within the principal contract as completing a substantial percentage of the overall contract, that prior to performance, the entity or owner was aware of the subcontractor chosen, and then subsequent to performance, accepted the work that they had done and compensated them accordingly. And then the 11th Circuit further refined this rule in Galehead by saying that a subcontractor should show that the owner was sufficiently aware of and involved in the work that it might be said that they were working for them. And then most recently in Barcliff, the 11th Circuit really honed in on the need for the subcontractor to show involvement on the part of the owner or authorized entity by saying that they should show a relationship over an extended period of time as the work progressed that cannot seriously be argued that they were not working on their behalf. So subsequently, the 5th Circuit, based on the cases that have been decided prior to Lake Charles Stevedores, created its own subcontractor exception, in which it said that a subcontractor can assert a lien if it can show that the owner or authorized entity controlled the selection of the subcontractor and or its performance. And in this particular case, the plaintiff was denied a lien, quote, based on the aforementioned circuit rules, that being Stevens and Marine Technical. So in creating its own exception, the 5th Circuit purported to adopt those two cases from the 11th Circuit. So moving back to Valero v. MB Almi Son, which is the case my case note is about, the 5th Circuit denied that Valero could assert a lien for two reasons. The first is under the language of SIM law, OW, the general contractor or fuel trader, not presumed to have any authority to bind the vessel, therefore its subcontractor, Valero, cannot assert a lien. And then looking at the Valero-OW relationship within this Lake Charles Stevedore exception, the court held that OW's only job was just to procure the bunkers, and all that it effectively did was, when asked by Almi, the vessel agent, what supplier did you choose? They responded Valero, and that was kind of it. So that was not enough to show that OW was acting on any authority to bind the vessel when it selected Valero. The court also dedicated a significant portion of the opinion to addressing the dissent. And the first thing the dissent argues is that when Lake Charles Stevedores cited to Stevens and Marine Coatings, what it was really doing was creating two separate lines of cases. And the majority says that these aren't different lines of cases or different rules, but these are all just illustrative examples of one general exception. What my analysis argues is that the 5th Circuit took an over-narrow view of Lake Charles, specifically as it pertains to Stevens, and specifically in regards to what Stevens said about owner identification and acceptance of the subcontractor prior to performance. And while it's not completely clear that, as the dissent argues, that two lines of cases were intended to be adopted in Lake Charles, The court's language in Lake Charles indicated that its subcontractor exception was at least based on those two cases. My analysis concludes that if you look to Stevens, ultimately Valero can show that Almi identified Valero prior to performance and also accepted them prior to performance. Like Stevens, in which the subcontractor was identified to the vessel owner prior to performance, here Valero was identified to Almi prior to performance. And going even further in this case, Almi specifically requested to know the name of the bunker supplier, and Valero was named. Another parallel is that in Stevens, the vessel owner recognized that the general contractor could not do the work themselves. They would need to contact a subcontractor. So here, Almi recognized that when they contacted OW that they were a fuel trader and that they would need to contact a fuel supplier in order to complete the work. Also in Galehead, the 11th Circuit specifically re-emphasized the need for a subcontractor to show identification and acceptance prior to performance. So to argue that because the most recent decision of Barcliff really honed in on involvement, that kind of overlooks the fact that the court specifically said that in Barcliff, or that the reasoning in Galehead controlled its decision in Barcliff. The second kind of thing that the dissent brings up is that by denying Valero a lien, that this would create a split with the 11th Circuit. And the majority says that because Barcliff involved a bunker supplier and because that bunker supplier was not afforded a lien by the 11th Circuit, that this foreclosed on any issue with a circuit split. My analysis states that the dissent erred in that it seemed to put owner involvement as being secondary to owner identification and acceptance, and placing too much weight on the piece of identification and acceptance and not enough on the involvement piece. And when you look to Lake Charles, that case specifically puts all three of those factors on equal footing. It doesn't seem to place one above the other as the dissent does. So my analysis ultimately concludes that even though Valero can show that identification and acceptance were met, ultimately it can't show that Almi was adequately involved in its work. The dissent said that because because Valero delivered the fuel to the vessel inspected the fuel, and the vessel signed off on the fuel, that this is enough to show owner-agent involvement. However, the 11th Circuit in Barcliff provided a very narrow view of what constitutes involvement by only contemplating projects that occur on a continuing basis in which there's an established rapport over an extended period of time. And in fact, the majority is correct in stating that Barcliff only contemplated extensive maintenance and repair contracts and explicitly categorized bunker supplying as being a one-off transaction where the communication between the two entities is really minimal or non-existent. And even without the limitation of Barcliff, the dissent does not cite to a decision that provides a clear indication that Almi's relationship with Valero was sufficient to entitle Valero to a lien. So in conclusion, the issue as to what circumstances a subcontractor like Valero can assert a lien are still unclear. While I don't think that this serves to create a split with the 11th Circuit, I do think that it does prohibit a bunker supplier from asserting a lien under Lake Charles, simply because the nature of the work, the involvement of the owner or the vessel is limited in that respect. So ultimately, I think this case will serve to have unintended consequences in the bunker supplying industry in terms of how they communicate with the vessel and the general contractor. So, thank you.